Welcome to the Divine Radiance Project with your host, Stacey Turner, and co-host, Emma McDonald, where we share all about reclaiming your radiance as women in business, holistic health, money, mindset, and juggling it all around mum life. A place for women to learn about financial independence, entrepreneurship, and balance. From women who aren't scared to speak their mind and their truth. It's time to shine your brightest self and be the lighthouse.
Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Emma, and today I have a guest who I think is fire. She is amazing, an amazing health expert in the women's natural realm, women health expert of 17 years. And I am actually a bit nervous today. I don't often get nervous, and I'm a bit of a fangirl, having a fangirl moment, really.
Emma, you don't need to be nervous, but thank you so much. I promise I'm not scary.
So welcome, Nat Kringoudis, to the show. I am all about women empowerment, and especially in health, business, life, whatever. That's what we created. Stacey and I created this podcast about. And I've been following you on social media for quite some time, and you're not afraid to have a conversation about things that might be controversial, or I like to say open-minded. I think the more we learn about health and the more that we learn about business and just being mums in life, there's always going to be things that you come up against that people are going to disagree with. And I think we need to be more about agreeing to disagree and still be friends and still be able to coexist in this world. And look, for a woman of your expertise to be here on our little podcast to start with, it's going to be grand one day, but to be so humble and agree to be here, I'm just like, there are no words. When I had reshared a reel that Nat had created, and she was like, oh, thanks so much for sharing it. And I was like, oh my gosh, she replied to my reel. And then I was like, you know what? You've got to have the guts to go after what you want. And so I just sent her a message and I said, love what you do, been watching you for a while. Would you like to be on our podcast? Because this is what we're about, and I feel like you fit in with this. And not thinking that you would actually say yes, you said yes. And I was like, oh my gosh, made my day.
Now we really have to do it. She said yes.
I know. I was like, oh crap, what have I gotten into? No. So here we are, obviously, but this particular reel is about birth control and going on birth control when you're a teen. Something I did when I was 17 because I knew no different and my mum knew no different. And I have a daughter. I have a 4-year-old daughter, and obviously being a naturopath, the natural wellness is something that is very dear to my heart. But I go, in this circumstance where we know that contraception plays a part in bringing up women, how am I ever going to have that conversation? What does that look like? Obviously, I've got lots of time up my sleeve, but it just makes me think, the more educated we can be earlier on, is that going to make a massive difference to our species later if we don't have to introduce something like this? First of all, I'd love to hear a little bit about you. Tell our listeners a little bit about you, and then we will go into this.
Sure.
subject. So take it away.
Thank you for having me. I am hopefully not scary. And I do really love to share as much as I can. So I love the fact that you asked the question. And that's something that I do a lot of, is actually just asking questions and putting it out there. Now, I may or may have an opinion, or may have an answer. And like you said, I've been in this industry for a really long time. It feels like a long time. It feels like no time. Like I've still got so much to learn. But I have sat with, at an estimate, 30,000 women, probably at this point more, and really listened to their stories. And my background's Chinese medicine. And I, many years ago, had the opportunity to start to treat women as they were coming into the clinic, more so for their fertility. And I really dived into that because they were asking questions that I didn't have the answer to. I had studied quite lengthy and in depth for a period of time, not just natural health, but I had studied biosciences, and so I felt like I was equipped. And I then launched into clinic and had absolutely no idea. And the space was very different 20 years ago than what it is now. It's considered far more integrative now than what it was then. It was very separate. And I remember women asking me questions saying, why have I got ovulation pain, or why am I finding it so difficult to conceive, or just all of the questions that I think we're still asking, but we at least have clearer answers for. And I remember saying to patients, I don't know, actually. I need to figure this out myself because there's not a good answer for me at this point in time. And really what I was able to put it down to eventually was our modern lifestyle that was really impacting our hormones. But we weren't talking about it medically and scientifically yet, but women were actually absolutely showing the signs of that. And so I just started asking permission to treat patients with no experience in this area whatsoever, and they were at their wits' end. And so we started having great success, and that really did propel my clinic and my ability to actually help people in a way that I never expected. In fact, I was not at all set up for that. And it's been a wild ride ever since, which has led to lots of other opportunities arise, I think, because I was just willing to take a chance and ask permission to help, but also mess up. If I didn't get it right, then I didn't get it right. But also no one was getting it right yet. So it was a perfect storm. And that led to where we're at today. And I do see it to be such a privilege to be able to show up and ask the questions and just more than anything, open people's minds, that little window that maybe was closed off from before, to think, oh, hang on a minute, maybe there is merit to that, or maybe there is more than one way to do something, or maybe we don't actually know the answers. Or so we're all learning together. Like I said, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I have sat with a lot of women and listened to their stories, and we've had some great successes along the way. And I think that's really what's led to like I said, it's such a privilege to be here today, being able to champion that as a different voice for women than I think what we're typically used to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think being that there's so many conversations to have, we just have to keep having them. And if the last 3 years has taught us anything, it's about keeping an open mind and listening and educating and empowering yourself to know differently or to ask the questions.
Just being curious. I think curiosity, is an amazing thing, an amazing state to exist in, because it's not this or that. It's just, I'm curious, and it's very expansive. Whereas obviously the opposite to that is very asphyxiating. And I think also you can know something and believe something until it doesn't work anymore. And then you're like, now what? So I think a lot of women, and we'll happily talk about the birth control, but I think a lot of women find themselves in that position where they've been on birth control for a long while and it was fine until it wasn't fine anymore. And then all of a sudden they're like, why are all these things happening? Why am I getting breakthrough bleeding? Why is my libido in the toilet? Why do I feel so moody all the time? Like, there's a lot of things that start to happen. And especially if there's a pre-existing condition and they've used birth control to mask that hormone imbalance or that condition, then really it tends to creep back slowly. And then once the transition is made from birth control to not taking that, the symptoms most often come back tenfold. So, and that's because it wasn't addressed in the first place, and all the things that birth control actually does. All the while, yes, okay, it shuts your cycle down. And that's actually, we know that's what it does. We know that's what it does. And still to this day, women will try and argue with me and say, no, I have a period on the pill. That's not, you're bleeding, but that's not a period. A period is a result of ovulation. You don't ovulate when you're on the pill. So what you're actually having is a withdrawal bleed, and they're horrified to learn that. They've been thinking for 20 years that they've been cycling, and they haven't. So I think that it starts with us asking questions and being curious around, okay, it's one thing to take birth control for contraception. We know that's what the benefit is. We live in a modern world with a lot of amazing things that can really support us and help us. So it's one thing to make the choice to use it for contraception, but it's another thing for it to be a solution, a long-term solution for a diagnosis. I think that is a really lazy approach to medicine, and it's a real disservice to women if that's what we're relying on. The problem is, medically, that's the solution. And often what we're treating isn't a druggable problem. So there's this big gap because we want a solution and your doctor wants to provide you one. That's their job. They want to fulfill their job. We want the solution. They want to provide it for you, and that's the solution. So we've got to look at ways outside of the box because, like I said, it's not necessarily druggable, but that's where we're at.
And we're not here saying that the medical system sucks, right? There's definitely areas that the medical system have let women down because there are no other options. So there is a place for medicine, and don't get me wrong, and this is a conversation I have in the clinic all the time, is I'm not here to say you have to choose. We are always happy to work in with whatever you feel as a patient is correct, but this is the information that you won't hear from the other side because they don't have other options.
And it's just not in their wheelhouse. Like I was talking to someone the other day, and that I think that, and this could be completely wrong, but it's an astonishing amount, whatever it is, that the amount of training that as a GP that you have in nutrition is 2 weeks. Like that could be wrong. Whatever the amount is, it's like a really tiny amount for the fact that someone is coming and seeking health advice. The problem actually is the system, not the doctor, but it's the system. And the system isn't really designed it's designed to treat illness, and it doesn't give any focus to health and well-being. It's actually about fixing a problem way down the line when it's a really big issue. So to your point, this is what I'm saying. What is the long-term sustainable solution, not the short-term solution? I think that the medical model is great for that short-term solution. But for many women, like I said, being on birth control for 20 plus years has ramifications that we're not talking about. And one of the biggest things that I'm very passionate about is speaking to mothers about their daughters, because this is actually where the problem starts. And it's nobody's fault, in the sense that as a mother, we want the best for our daughters. And typically what happens is, if your daughter has a problem in her mid-teens, so often the solution from the doctor is birth control. We know that the longer somebody is not on birth control for, as their hormones are developing as a teenager, the less problematic it is down the line. And that is because our sex hormones don't mature until around the age of 21. And if we are halting that maturation, let's say at 16, we're decided, all right, but you've been to the doctor, you haven't had a period. They're like, let's get you having a period. We're going to put you on birth control. Now, we've already discussed why that's a disaster, because it's not a real bleed and not a period anyway. But that's the solution. So the 16-year-old goes on birth control at 16 and then decides to come off it at 26 because she wants to get married and have children. She's as hormonally mature as her 16-year-old self. Her whole axis of hormones has to fire back up again as the 16-year-old to develop. So it's not any wonder that women are seeing that the problem is not only that it's still there, but can often be worse because of the side effects and what the pill actually takes away. So we know it robs the body of essential vitamins and minerals. The only thing it doesn't rob of is iron. It's the only benefit. And when it comes to vitamins and minerals, any medication disrupts gut function. So we know that at the very least, there's those two things. But also there's a fantastic book, if you haven't read it, Your Brain on Birth Control by Dr. Sarah Hill. And she talks about how it changes the chemistry and the way that we think. It changes how we act and behave. It changes our brain. So to me, this is a real disservice to young girls who aren't getting this information, but also the doctor probably doesn't have that information either. And so it's just the system is very disconnected. And I think that absolutely looking, and also probably the 16-year-old maybe needs to see a gynecologist, not a GP. And even then, though, often the solution is birth control still, but you may get some hormone testing done and you may get a diagnosis at that point. You can't really diagnose much at 16. Hormones aren't mature enough to be making the big bold call of PCOS is usually what is done at that point. And girls go through a phase at the age of around 16 where it does mimic PCOS. The changes in their hormones mimic PCOS. So a lot of girls are prematurely diagnosed because that hasn't been taken into consideration. There's so many factors, but I really want the mother that's listening, or at least banking that information for 10 years down the road, to really think about, okay, what's actually happening here and why is there a hormone imbalance in my 16-year-old and what can I actually do to support her? nobody wants a teen pregnancy. I understand that. But I think also teaching our daughters how to understand their fertility when they're fertile, when they're not, has to be the biggest gift you can give any woman. And so many women don't even have that because they've shut their hormones down at the age of 16. They've come off when they're ready to have children, and they'll say to me, I'm embarrassed to tell you, I don't even know what ovulation is. And I'm like, you don't need to be embarrassed. You've never actually had to know about it because you've been flatlining your hormones all this time. So let's get learning. But it is, there's so many parts of the puzzle that really do break my heart. And I think it's really important that we continue to have these conversations openly. Nobody's wrong or right. You do you at the end of the day. If it feels good to go on birth control and that's the best option, amazing. So long as you have the information to make that informed choice, I think that's really where we mostly go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So what would you say to a mum to start having this conversation? So say this is a mum of a 13, 14-year-old, because women are having their periods so much earlier than what my generation did. And yeah, where do they even start?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I want to rewind a little bit and say, when your children first start to ask the question, where did I come from? Please start having conversations when they're asking, because they're ready to learn. They will prompt you, and you don't need to give them a full-on biology lesson, but it would be useful if you actually just start to speak facts, not the stork delivered you. That's, if you actually think about that, it's a horrible thing to think about, that you were flying through the air at some point and then dropped on someone's doorstep. Awful.
Yeah.
And for some people, the doctor put you there actually isn't a stretch. Maybe the doctor did put you there, but it's also, I think, the very basics. Dad has sperm, mum has an egg. And when they get together, that's called conception, and that's when a baby's made. Most kids won't say, how do they get together, when they're really little. Eventually, they're going to ask. And then that's where you can continue to have those conversations. The fact is that kids don't have an emotional attachment to a sexual encounter. So they're just happy to have the facts and generally move on, whereas we have got emotions wrapped up in that, and it's very different. So just continue to have age-appropriate conversations as they arise is the first thing I think we need to do. But also, once we do that, we continue to have the conversation about our hormones and as they change, and obviously girls developing their cycle and having a period. And then once the period arrives, you can start to have those conversations about ovulation and what that looks like, and really teaching them to understand that's the time that they are fertile. And actually at any other time, then they're actually not. So I think it's just a conversation that evolves over time. And once it gets to the point of contraception, and if they are sexually active, I really believe that anyone that's sexually active, especially when we're in our teens and even early 20s, if we're not with the one partner, we should be using protective methods anyway, because nothing else protects from an STD. The pill doesn't protect you from an STD or an STI. And I've seen the long-term effects of people having an infectious disease and how debilitating and problematic that can be for their fertility. So I think we should be encouraging our teenagers, if they are sexually active, to always be using barrier methods, so a condom, because that's the only thing that's going to protect from that. But it's also going to prevent pregnancy. And if there happens to be an accident that falls in the fertile window, then that's when I would say plan B. And there's the marvel of modern medicine to be able to help us out. But to flatline hormones 24/7 for the whole of every month for as long as that just doesn't even make sense to me at this point, when you can really only fall pregnant several days in the cycle. And once you know when they are, I don't know about you, but I'm at a point where I would have to be blind drunk, like not conscious, to have unprotected sex at that point in time for an accident to happen. It's just, it's so blatantly obvious. I'm like, how do you not know this stuff? But I've been watching that, and I've been using fertility awareness forever. So to me, it's just so obvious. But to probably, there's people listening going, I have no idea when that is. And if you're afraid of that, no wonder you're going to pass that fear on to your children as well. So we need to get comfortable ourselves as parents and mothers and aunties and whoever else is listening, loved ones. We need to get comfortable with our own fertility awareness so that we can pass that wisdom on to our children.
Yeah, because half the population are having a cycle. It's probably more, whatever
Right.
the male female situation is at the moment. But let's just go with half.
Let's go with half.
And yeah, and I don't remember as a kid knowing much about it. Like, I've had this conversation even with my daughter, because we have a bit of an open door policy in our family. Not everyone has to, but the questions around having a period have already started. And at the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, is she too young to know what this is about? And I'm like, it's a natural biological process that she will go through. Of course, it's a normal conversation to have. Why can't we talk about bleeding and mummy's upset and crying and why that links
Right.
into whatever? She won't understand, but it's just about that open communication where I think that, yeah, for sure,
I
it's
think it
gotten lost.
provides layers as well, like conversations that each time that you have another conversation, it's another layer to the piece of that puzzle that is our bodies as women. And it means, I don't know, I remember my mum telling me around the age of 13 and giving me the talk. And I was fascinated, but I was also petrified. I was like, what happens if you get your period and you're at the shopping center and what do? I just thought it was just going to be this floodgate that were going to open up and it was going to gush out everywhere. It wasn't, and it wasn't her fault. It was a generational thing as well. Like at the time, it really was very in the closet conversations about this is going to happen. And so I think being able to move past that taboo and mystery and just showing it as being something that's normal and something that happens. It's not even that it's normal. It's just what happens. You don't hide the fact that you're blowing your nose or I'm going to the bathroom because I need to move my bowels. I'm not hiding that. I'm not proclaiming it to the world either. And I don't think we need to. But I do think that the conversations around that need to exist so that it doesn't feel like this mystical thing that happens or that it's this bomb that is placed on you when you're 13 or 14 or whatever age is appropriate, where you feel like your life is going to turn inside out and back the front. So the conversations really help, I think, to prevent that from happening and take that burden also off the mother or the loved one and really just realize that this is just part of being a woman.
Yeah, the shame, taking that shame out of it too.
And this generation is much better, I have to say. My daughter's 16
for sure.
and it's definitely, she wouldn't have any issues about going into the supermarket and buying pads or tampons. She would just do it. She's not ashamed of that. Whereas I would have hidden that thing and I would have definitely asked for a bag and I would have shoved it in another bag. And at her age, for sure. Let's just think about, and whatever people decide to use, there's cups and pads but those, the pads that I had to use, they were like a surfboard. They were freaking awful and they felt like they did a dance in your pants every time you walked around. Like technology has come a long way.
For sure. That's a whole nother topic that I'm sure we could talk about from a chemical point of view. But anyway.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah. But so tactical things that we can give our listeners. So for me, when I'm in clinic, something that I use a lot of the time is some sort of period app. So having kids will at 13, 14, 15 will probably have some sort of phone or smart device. So for me, one piece of advice would be to actually start to track what's going on, moods, even having the conversation around cervical discharge, which is something that people are like, whoa, what is that word? Don't say that word. But that can tell your body a lot. So is there anything in particular that you also like to suggest?
Yeah, you're right. I think tracking it is the most important thing you can do because if you're not, you really quickly forget where you are in your cycle. And you can be like, did I ovulate? Has that happened yet? I don't know where I'm at. And that can set a whole lot of panic that's unnecessary. So I think tracking it every day is very important to know where you're at. It's also very important, like you said, from a mood perspective. I know that the 2 days before my period is due, my creativity is in the toilet. But if I don't know that, and in the past didn't know that, I would get to these days and think, is this me now? Is this how I am? Like, am I ever going to have my creative spark back? This feels awful. I don't want to be here. And you go down that rabbit hole and then your period arrives. You're like, oh, all the mysteries are solved. Whereas if I know this, then I can give myself grace because we are not very good at pulling back when we need to pull back. We are not very good at doing that. So I think just being able to track that and see, okay, my period's due. No wonder I feel a bit flat. Just give yourself grace to be flat. Do the bare minimum. It's going to be back in a couple of days and you're going to feel better. The one thing I would say with tracking is the more you track it and you can actually input your symptoms, the more it'll make sense. And if you're just relying on an app and you're only inputting the period, it can be a little bit grey. And I think this is where fertility awareness gets a bad rap, is because people aren't actually invested in doing it properly and watching every day what's happening. So it is important that you are checking in with that. And if you're just relying on an app, it will give you data based on the previous month. But we change all the time. So if you're relying on your app to tell you when you ovulate, that could be a slippery slope because that can change month to month. And again, we don't want accidents to happen that could be prevented. So just being mindful, I think, and really tracking that, the more accuracy you can have. Full transparency, I am the distributor of Daisy Australia and New Zealand, which is a device that tracks it. Daisy is generations old now. But what I love about it is it's very accurate in being able to predict your non-fertile days. So if you are that person that is coming off birth control and you're really not sure and you actually are really stressed out about it, using a device that tracks, and there's many of them on the market, using the device that actually tracks your cycle for you because you're inputting your temperature every day, that to me is the next level to that really takes the guesswork out of it. And I can't give the stats for obviously all devices, but they all work off the same thing and the same algorithm. Daisy's been around for a really long time, which is why I like it. And it's able to predict your non-fertile days with 99.4% accuracy, which is actually more accurate than birth control. But we can't call it a contraception because it's not a contraception. It's using fertility awareness. So that's, I think, where these conversations need to keep on happening, because a lot of people will say, oh, yes, the Billings method. I've heard about that before. And we're like, that's not what we're talking about. Not at all. We've come a long way. We've come a long way. So yeah. I think that there are so many things that can help us as women to monitor and understand our cycles. But if you've never had to do it before, if you've never been curious about this before, then this can feel like a whole new world opening up.
And just for some people that might be on birth control and considering that they might not feel themselves, or all of a sudden the last few months they haven't felt themselves, what are some things to keep an eye out for that could be birth control related? Like symptoms that they do.
I think the biggest thing that women report is there's so many, but the biggest thing is low libido, which makes me laugh because if you're on it for birth control and then you don't actually have any sex drive, that doesn't really make sense.
Purpose, right?
Yeah. I think the amount of women that I see that it increases headaches and especially migraines is really concerning, and it's a contraindication to be on birth control if you have migraines. Yet I see that all the time. So you can see an increase in headaches and migraines. I think what's really interesting, a lot of women don't actually know how they feel until they transition off birth control, and then they'll say, oh my goodness, I didn't know what it was like to be me. Like I've spent a really long time trying to figure out why I haven't felt right and I can't put my finger on it, but I feel like me again. And that's what we were talking about before. It alters the way that you think. So if you're not having the ebbs and flows, it could be in one sense so lovely to just be like this all the time, right?
Oh yes, the plateau.
But whilst the highs might be high and the lows are low, that's all part of actually helping you to be you, helping you to make decisions based on where you're at on a certain day, we do this. We don't know we're doing it. We're just doing it anyway. And so we don't have that it kind of alters that internal GPS, so to speak. We don't want that either necessarily. So I think moods, headaches, breakthrough bleeding. If you're on birth control for period pain and you've still got period pain, it's not working. I see that all the time. I'm like, this is not actually working. And there are things that you can do, and it's not necessarily going to be the long-term solution. I will also say to that patient or person that is on birth control because they've got endometriosis or adenomyosis or some form of diagnosis, it can give you great relief. Don't get me wrong. It can give you great relief until it doesn't work anymore, like I said. So it's really important, I think, to come in and actually I call it scaffolding. Let's fix everything in the back end whilst you're on birth control. And then if you don't want to be on it anymore, which is a lot of women's stories. And then how many women say to you, I don't want to be on this, but I have to. And I'm like, oh.
It's more than I can count. Yep.
And you're like, you don't actually have to, but don't do nothing either. That would be dangerous. And also, it really is important if you can get your health team to be on board with transitioning off birth control. Now, there's nothing to say it's not like an IUD that has to be removed. This is actually why my preference is birth control, because you can decide you have more control over that, whereas a Mirena has to be removed. If you can get your healthcare team on board, then you can actually strategize that together. And this is what I would always encourage patients to do. It's like, how can I enroll your doctor? How can I enroll your whoever's taking care of your complementary medicine? And let's get everyone on the same page and let's do this together. There are a lot of great doctors out there too, by the way, but they'll say, this is not my wheelhouse. Listen to her. I can help you with everything else. How nice. So I really encourage you to find your cheer squad when it comes to your healthcare providers that are actually excited for you to be as healthy as possible. That to me is actually healthcare. And so that's what I encourage people to do. And if you found that you're not, doesn't matter what healthcare provider, if they're not listening to you, then find someone that does, that you resonate with. You don't have to stay with anyone. It doesn't matter who that is. I think we would be happier to walk away from our chiropractor than we would our doctor, because we place so much importance on the doctor. And that's not wrong, but let's find the right doctor for you, like the one that listens, the one that you feel connected to. That, I think, is actually how we really change things and actually fast track our healthcare. That being listened to is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a reel the other day from someone that was explaining that the pill doesn't affect fertility. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. I would love to know your thought on that.
Here's the thing. On paper, it shouldn't affect fertility. But sit in my office and I cannot deny that the women that have come off birth control are the ones that seem to have a more challenge, not always, but generally speaking, more challenges with falling pregnant. Now, maybe it's a few reasons. For many women, it can take a really long time for their hormones to come back online again. They've been taken offline and the body's got to figure out how to put them back into place again. That's affecting fertility, albeit temporarily. It's still affecting your ability to conceive. It's still delaying that. So there's one example of how it absolutely impacts fertility. For some women, they can see dramatic changes in their hormones that feel awful and horrible, and the last thing they want to do is have children. But also, if there's a diagnosis that's underlying and it hasn't been addressed, let's say PCOS. PCOS doesn't affect fertility, but your chances of conception are less if you're having longer cycles. So again, because it hasn't actually fixed the problem, I think that we've got to be really careful with language here. But like I said before, we know birth control definitely depletes vitamins and minerals, as I said before. That can be enough. If you don't have the backbone to make hormones, you're not going to make hormones. It's like pretty simple. And we know it disrupts gut function, and with that can come a lot of inflammation in the body, which can also be something that stands in the way of fertility. There's so many moving parts to this. So for many women, it might not, but there's also many women that it does. And also ask the women. They'll tell you. They'll say to me, I wish I had this information. I wish I never went on birth control. And why didn't anyone tell me this? And so it's not my story, because that's not me. I'm the one sitting with the women listening to the information. So I don't think we can say, I think we can say it can definitely impact fertility temporarily. As for how long that lasts is an individual person by person. And let's ask the women out there that are the ones that are actually blaming birth control for their fertility challenges. There are many, but I feel like there are so many claims written up in an article where it's based on a really small cross-section of women. And nowadays when people say, show me the research, I'm like, just come into the clinic, please.
Yeah,
come and sit here. Because that's really what I base the way I approach things. Now, whether or not it's written in stone somewhere out in the world, I don't know, but I need to actually listen to what the patients are telling me and figure out the solutions based on that. And so I think that becomes more important. But it's nice when we do have information to back up what we've been probably saying for a long time as women, that we've seen this impact. Now, there's also women that come straight off birth control and fall pregnant. There's also women that actually fall pregnant whilst they're on birth control. So it's not perfect. No, it's none of this is perfect.
It's holistic health for a purpose. It's always treating someone individually.
Yeah.
So try not to compare yourself to others.
I think so. And also the other thing that we're learning is I was listening to something that, who was it? Maybe Lara Bryden was talking about the other day about how many cycles women don't actually ovulate. And I'm like, this is so interesting actually, because how often we're in such a hurry to have children, I think more than ever, probably because we've wanted to put our career first. And this is something that birth control has allowed women to do. And so I think that we've got to see it for what it is. It's allowed us to live a different life, but it may mean we've delayed having children. And so therefore the race is on. We've been told our clock is ticking. We've got to get going. You're going to run out of time. And then hang on a minute. Now we're finding out that maybe half of our cycles we don't ovulate anyway. So really we're putting pressure on conception when maybe we don't have a chance every cycle. Who knows? I just think it's very interesting. I think if we can just come back to always putting our body into the best possible position that it can be in, and we really just focused on that, I think that a lot of the other challenges that we have would actually just dissipate.
Yeah. Yeah. Kami, you have a cycle. Even when you're younger, it takes time to create what looks like you, what your normal is, but there is always a way to get on top of things that are going pear-shaped, right? So
there
even
is always
13, 14, 15 in the beginning, you can always ask the question to someone, is this normal? And then consider your options. So if we did that back then, we probably would have less issues 20s, 30s.
I think looking down the family line is very important to see what your child may be predisposed to. And if your child was to live your exact path, probably those symptoms would be presented. Our job is to look at the family line. And I always say, when you have presentation of any illness, it's like all the switches are flicked on. So we're on, we're flared, we're going, your body's trying to tell you something. Our job is to turn some of those switches off that are triggering that to happen in your body. So PCOS, for example, if we can turn off some of those switches knowing the history, it's almost like it never has to spill over into it actually presenting. You still carry the genetic trait for that to be turned on at some point. We're trying to prevent that from being turned on. It's hard because we can't see our uterus or the inside of our body. But I do say to patients, I have a history of eczema. I lived 20 years or so without any eczema at all, whatsoever, like none. And then in the last 3 years, I've started to have really big issues with eczema again. Eczema has never gone. It's always been something that I'm predisposed to, but I flicked off enough switches that it didn't actually present for 20 years. And then actually after COVID, that's what triggered it. And we know that COVID triggered inflammation. We know COVID triggered pre-existing conditions. It turned it all back on. So I've spent the last 3 years trying to take switches off again, which I think we're there, but it's something that I can physically see. So it's something that's easy to explain. But it's the same triggers that will, if you're predisposed to PCOS or you're predisposed to endometriosis, we've got to turn some of those switches off so it's not presenting. You still carry the possibility for it to be turned on. You never can, it's never leaving your body, in the sense that we love the idea of being cured. It's not about being cured. It's about living your life in the best possible way without evidence of illness or symptoms to show you that your body's actually functioning in an optimal state.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. I love that. Now, look, I'm very conscious of your time, and we could talk about this, I'm sure, forever on so many different levels. But there is something that we ask every one of our guests, which I'd love you to answer if you have an answer. But if time, money were no boundaries, what would you be doing?
I don't think I'll be doing anything different to what I'm already doing. I've thought about this many times. I think I would probably just give myself a little bit more flexibility, but I think nothing would change in the sense of I'm so grateful for what I get to do every day. And so I don't think I would change anything. I might maybe have 2 months in Greece every year. Like that might be a thing. But other than that, I'd be doing exactly what I'm doing. Hopefully I'd be doing exactly what I'm doing now.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's, dream goals, right?
Yeah, I think that it's so important that we continue to create a life we love. And I'll tell you something really funny before I know that we're conscious of time, but my son said to me not that long ago, do you know, so unfair because you get to go and do what you love every day and I have to go to school and I hate it. Like, oh, can't argue. I do love every day.
School is the hard part.
No,
We all do.
I know.
So,
I'm glad I'm not there.
no, same. Okay, so also, where can people find you? What are you up to at the moment in all the things that you're doing?
Everything is Nat Kringoudis. There's only one. It's so funny I say that. It sounds like I'm full of myself, but there is literally only one. Hanging out mostly on Instagram, but my website is also Nat Kringoudis. If you search Nat Kringoudis, you'll find many things. And yeah, I really do find Instagram is a great platform to create these curious conversations and share information. Every now and again, get a little bit rowdy and controversial. Try not to do that too much, but sometimes I can't help myself. And I really do. I love interacting with people there. I love having conversations and just really helping to support people, or at least just so that women can make informed choices. That's where we hang out these days.
And you've got are you in clinic patients as well?
Yes, my clinic is in Melbourne. We see people all around the world, but that's the marvel of telehealth. But in clinic, we're in Melbourne in Albert Park. So love helping patients one-on-one as well. And we have a bunch of masterclasses. We have a membership and a bunch of masterclasses pretty much there's 20-something masterclasses in there now, everything from endo to perimenopause to meal plans and hair health. Like we've got everything in there. So that's something that people can check out as well.
Yes, I did see your link tree. I was like, oh my gosh, there's
so many amazing it's a mess. There's so many things there.
No.
I just don't know how else to give people access to those things. We need to make them more accessible on the website.
Oh, I think people are on Instagram. I think that does make it easy.
Yeah.
Click away and it's all it's all there. It's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure talking with you. And yeah, everyone, if you want to check out Nat Kringoudis on Instagram, she also has a podcast with some amazing guests on there. Just this woman. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. Listen, if you love what you heard here today, I would love for you to leave a super quick rating and a review. This helps the show get discovered by new people that need to hear what we have to share. Be sure to take a screenshot of today's episode and shout us out on Instagram, and we will shout you right back. You can find us on Instagram handles It's Stacey Turner and the.emma.mcdonald. If you'd like to find additional resources or work with either of us, then DM us on one of these handles today.